this line of thinking, we continue with scalability, performance, and I'm pleased to introduce Zheji Yan, who will be speaking about sharding, but we talked yesterday briefly. It has also some applications to off-chain, so the floor is yours.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zheji. I'm a postdoc at TU Delft, and today I'm going to present a work of a paper, a scale-out blockchain for value transfer with spontaneous sharding. This is trying to work with some of our, well, that's great, some of our master students or former master students, and also with Zeke Yerkin, who is the assistant professor at our group, cybersecurity group, and part of blockchain lab in Delft, University of Technology. Yeah, I have to revisit, to reintroduce blockchain, but I guess all of you in this room are blockchain experts, so you may wonder why I have to listen to the introduction of blockchain once again. But yeah, I think if you are a blockchain expert, you will know that everyone talking about different blockchains, so I have to specify what type of blockchain I am talking about. This blockchain is actually a very abstract blockchain, type of blockchain. It's very similar to Bitcoin type of style. So it's basically a distributed ledger. And a distributed ledger means the main content of our blockchain is basically transactions, which are the records of value transfers. So as simple as Alice sent certain value to Bob, right? The key problem of this type of blockchain is to prevent double spending. And to prevent double spending, it is commonly believed that you need the whole transaction record to do that. So the whole transaction set is needed. So the idea is kind of intuitive. So you have to know all the past transactions, because if you do not know that, then there is a potential, for example, a transaction that you do not know, and then that guy who sent that transaction can send it to you, and then that causes a double spending. Right? So the way you prevent double spending is you need to have the whole transaction set. And that will not scale out, or sometimes called not scalable. It means that so it has an order of n communication cost per transaction. Then if you increase the number of nodes in the network, the throughput will not increase. And it will lead to this very famous trilemma, now has been known by many persons, saying that many people saying that you cannot achieve scale out decentralization and security at the same time. It is also kind of straightforward from our perspective of you need the whole transaction record. Okay, so you don't have the whole transaction set, let's assume. That's the only way you can get scale out performance. And that means either you cannot validate all the transactions, so there is a possibility of double spending, means you sacrifice security, or you rely on someone else to do the validation of transactions, send it to you, then it means centralization. Okay, and then we also need to revisit the value transfer aspect of blockchain. So as we said, everyone needs to hold a consistent ledger of all the past transactions. And that is, well, so the key challenge of that part is that we all know that blockchain runs in an unsafe environment. So some of the nodes in the network is untrusted. And to hold a consistent ledger of all a consistent ledger in an untrusted environment is in general known as by the default tolerance problem. It is hard. And the biggest contribution, in my opinion, that Satoshi Nakamoto make is to achieve that in a large network. And we all know how he did that. He introduced the game theoretical perspective into this problem, and he introduced incentive. Well, firstly, he made all the nodes to take some effort before he can actually send a block. And then to make up to this effort, there is incentive given to the miners, and the incentive is basically transaction fees plus block reward. And let's take a look at the transaction fee, emphasis on transaction fee at this moment, because we know that Bitcoin actually has a decreasing block reward. We all know how. So now we have incentive. But why there is an incentive at the first place? So where does the transaction fee comes from? Why do we want to pay transaction fee? And the answer is actually quite simple, but I think it has been mislooked by many researchers so far is that we want to make transaction. So there is a need, eccentric needs for us to make transactions. So when you want to go to a store, you want to make a certain transaction, and you want to the shopkeeper need to know that the value you send to him is secure, and that's why we have a bank, we have a credit card, we have even the currency at the first place. Right? So there is a need that we want to make a transaction, and then there is a certain assumption that we can make for this value transfer system, and these assumptions haven't been explicitly mentioned in previous work, and so we actually explicitly defined it here. So in a value transfer system, we define this following assumption. So the sender actually is motivated to make a proof to the receiver saying that the transaction, the value sent to the receiver is valid. And the receiver is motivated to verify this proof that the sender sent it to him. And then in the traditional schemes, in traditional banking schemes, the proof is basically provided by the bank. And in Bitcoin, it is basically the sender takes some effort. He either do mining or he pay the transaction fee to the miner to put his transaction on this Bitcoin chain. And after 6 confirmation, he showed this chain to the receiver saying that, look, this is the Bitcoin, and it is immutable. And if I do not have enough hash power, I cannot generate such a thing. And the receiver verify the chain and all the hashes, and they see that, okay, indeed, your transaction is on the chain. It is immutable. So the receiver believes that the transaction is made. And that's how we define the assumption for value transfer system. And now we go to our structure. It's actually a very simple structure. We propose a structure with a main chain. So the main chain is simply it can be any chain, and this chain, we assume that it reaches BFT in the whole network. And for the easy, only for the sake of easy comprehension, we assume there is weak synchrony, and we assume that they reach BFT with PBFT for the main chain. So everything on the main chain, actually everybody knows, okay? And then there's individual chain. Everyone put their transactions in their individual chain. It's only the transactions that they send. So what does the individual chain looks like is simply a block of all the transactions they have made. And periodically they send a hash of their block together with some metadata like their signature, like the height of the block, to the main chain to reach consensus. And yeah, so okay, and we also do not consider new coins, so minting. So we assume that there is a predetermined value given to all the nodes, and this value is somehow sealed in the genesis block of each node, and also sealed in the genesis block of the main chain. And so what is basically the transactions in the individual chains is not yet validated. It can be anything. The only thing is guaranteed in the individual chain is that once it's an abstract after the transaction in the individual chain is sent to the main chain as a seal, then you cannot fork your chain. You cannot change anything on the chain anymore because the other people will see that it is not the same as the one you sent to the main chain. Okay, so there is no validation on the transaction in the individual chain yet. And well, you might think this looks familiar because this actually has its similarities with many existing schemes or ideas, like off-chain ideas as well, and also maybe it also somehow looks like a DAG, directly acyclic graph. But what we do is that we formalize this system, and we claim that this one is actually better. Why? Because now we look at how do we prove a value haven't been double spent in this system, in our framework. Traditionally, I said to prevent double spending, you need the whole transaction set. And in our system, how can I prevent that? How can I show that value haven't been double spent. Let's assume the red guy is Alice, well, red lady is Alice, and I receive a value from Alice. And what kind of proof that I need to make sure that this value haven't been spent before? Basically, I need Alice chain to see that she haven't spent this value before. And I also need, if Alice received from Bob, I also need Bob's chain and to see Bob haven't spent this value before, up until the point he sent it to Alice. So basically, the proof I need for a value to be authentic is all the chains of the previous owner of this value up until the point they spend it, right? And this is not the whole transaction set. So I think the benefit of this structure is that we can easily separate the proof needed to prove the authenticity of every piece of the value from the whole transaction set. And our proposal of how this system works is when people make transactions. For example, Alice made a transaction to me, and she need to prove it to me. She need to send some proof to show that, yeah, this value is authentic. And the problem is, okay, the first thing is how can I make sure that this transaction can always happen? How can I make sure that I can always get the proof, or she can always provide the proof? The second question is, if I got the proof, can I be absolutely sure that this value is really authentic? And I also need to be sure that all the other people will also consider this value is authentic. The third problem is, well, is this actually better than the performance will actually better than traditional schemes? Well, let's answer them one by one. The first one is how to make sure that I can always get the proof, or Alice always has the proof. Well, at the first sight, it seems to be a bit difficult because, okay, I don't even need only need Alice's chain, I need also Bob's chain and all the previous owners' chains. And Bob has no incentive, have no motivation to provide that to me since Bob already spent the value, right? But in fact, there is no single point of failure because when Alice received the chain from Bob, Bob provided his chain to Alice already. And basically, Alice will only accept value only if she has verified the complete proof of this value, which includes Bob's chain and all the previous owners' chains. And when Alice provided to me, what I need to do is I verify Alice's chain and all the proof, and I will keep them with me because that's the proof I need when I want to spend it over again. And when I want to spend it, I simply add my chain to that. So the proof will always travel with the transaction. So Alice alone can make the transaction to me. She doesn't need to contact anybody else, and me alone can make to spend this value again. The second question is how to make sure that when I got the proof, I can be sure that the value is really authentic, and I can make sure that all the nodes in this network will have the same opinion with me. And the thing is actually, in our structure, with this on and off chain structures, all the transactions in the off chain are satisfying the validity and agreement property of BFT, but not termination. So what does that mean? It means that there is no guarantee that any transaction in the off chain will eventually be known by anyone. But let's just take the transaction that Alice sent me to, for example. There is no guarantee that I will ever know about the Alice sent me this value. And there is no guarantee that Alice will provide the proof to me. But it doesn't matter because remember our assumption, Alice is motivated to do that. And it makes no sense that Alice make a valid transaction to me without showing me the proof. And it also makes no sense for Alice to make a transaction to me and without telling me it. And the thing is, if she spend this value to me and this transaction is valid, then she cannot spend this again because if she wants to send this value to another node in the network, she needs to provide her chains to that other node. And the other node will see that she has already provided this value to me. So basically, based on the assumption that we made for rationalities in value transfer system, actually, our system is already good enough. We don't need termination. The termination is guaranteed by our assumption. Something we called implicit consensus in some of our older version of the paper. And the last question is actually a bit hard to answer. Is it really better than traditional scheme? So I have to say that in some extreme transaction patterns, when everyone communicate to everybody, well, that is not a very appropriate way to say that. But at the worst case, it's the same. It is no better than the traditional scheme. But well, let's think about it. So what is eventually now in our system, eventually the transactions that you need to get? You will have a certain values. Let's just assume you open up your wallet and see a lot of notes in your wallet. And these are values. For each piece of value, there is a bunch of proof with it. And the proofs are basically the chains of some other nodes, right? And then now the things that you need is the proof of all the values you have. That's the things you need to store in our system. And the proof size of a value, let's think about it. In the proof size of a value in traditional system is the same for all the values. So for all the value to prove it is authentic, it is a whole transaction set. But in our system, the proof of each value is different. Has a different set of chains, actually. And when I send a value to another node, actually, if I try to minimize my transmission cost, then there is a priority for each value that I have. For example, I open up my wallet, I see that there are some money I received from China. There are some money I received from Europe, and there are some money I received in Switzerland. And when I want to pay someone in this room, I probably will use the one I received from Switzerland because that is easier for me to prove. So the proofs that for this transaction, perhaps you already have them. And this is not a very vague statement because you will also want to, firstly, you also want to minimize your storage cost. So you are actually motivated to share that information, what kind of proof you already have with me. And the second thing is, think about this private channel thing. So if we did a lot of communication, I probably already have an idea of what kind of chains you already have. So if everybody does that, so everybody try to minimize the proof they send for each transaction, what will happen? The things I call spontaneous sharding will happen, is that all the value will turn to cycle only in a small part of the network instead of the whole network. So basically means that the proof size of each value is sharded. The proof size is not the whole transaction set. And now, eventually, well, let's just assume that this is a shard of a value. Well, let's just imagine this is a shard of a value 1. This is a shard of value 2, shard of value 3. And each node will have a certain value in his wallet, and means that he needs a chain of a certain shards. And at the worst case, if you actually pick the shards, you have a lot of value so that these shards actually covers the whole network. Okay, our system is no better than the traditional one. But if you think about these shards are simply currencies, so this one means US dollar, this one means euro, and this one means Swiss francs. And you open up your wallet, you probably find that you don't have all the currencies in the world, right? So that is an idea about why our system could shard automatically. And we also have some simulative results showing that even in some very small network that everyone don't need to really get all the transactions. And also we show that theoretically that in a random graph type of transaction pattern, if everyone minimize their transmission and communication cost, and eventually only log n, the communication cost per transaction is only log n, which I call scale out. And the conclusion is that, okay, so firstly, I think it is very crucial that we formalize a model for value transfer. So we formalized what type of rationality is in the value in the model for value transfer. I think this is quite kind of important because there are some, in fact, there are a lot of statements is using the rationalities of nodes in value transfer system without explicitly stated. For example, private channels, Lightning Network. Lightning Network is using the like some kind of deposit in the main chain, and then they claim that on the off chain the transaction is actually secure, but they actually make a hidden assumption saying that they don't want to cheat because they will lose the deposit. But this thing is, well, we actually use this, define this thing about, they are rational. The value transfer has a certain property so that they don't want to cheat. And also we propose an alternative framework for blockchain, and we emphasize this on the values and proofs. And we claim that this is very good for value transfer system. And because we introduced something called spontaneous sharding, because in this system, the proofs are not the whole transaction set, so that there is, the value where tends to only cycle in a small group, eventually the system could have the potential to scale out. And the last remark I want to make is about this trilemma. I think this trilemma is not in generally true because it's only true when the blockchain means that you need to store the whole transaction set. And if you don't need to store the whole transaction set, there are two things. First thing, I actually always think the decentralization and security is the same thing. The second one is, okay, if you don't need the whole transaction set, let us what I introduced for value transfer. If the functionality you want is to prevent double spending, and you can make the assumption of rationality of people for value transfer, then the system could scale out automatically. Well, it could scale out in some cases by itself. It doesn't need to really scale out by sacrificing decentralization. And in my opinion, like if you have other smart contracts and you can define the proof, what is a proof to verify a smart contract. And by different smart contract, you can find whether this thing can scale out. In some cases, for example, the previous speaker talked about, I couldn't find him, but I talked about the certificates of a certain diploma. And that type of functionality, actually you don't need the whole transaction set to do the verification. And then this kind of system would scale out automatically. And so in general, I think this trilemma should be reconsidered carefully. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention. Any questions? Sure. Well, in fact, for Alice chain, well, there is something like, we assume that there is a PKI, so we assume that the public key of each node is known by the whole network, and Alice can do whatever she wants with the chain. And she just periodically sends a hash of her block to the main chain to reach consensus. And because she is motivated to prove her transaction to the others, so if she did something wrong with her chain, then people will not accept her value. That's all. No. So do you mean there's something wrong with the main chain, or we?
I mean, the problem in Alice chain will affect the data transaction on
Well, then Bob will not receive Alice's value at the first place, because Bob will only receive a value if he can use it ever again, right? So a money, as you see, if you receive a money which is broken and you think I can never use that again, you will not receive it at the first place. That is our assumption. Okay,
So did you use a simplified transaction model? If you compare to Bitcoin, for example, you can take a list of input transactions and being sent to n places, and that's one transaction. I suppose you have a simpler model here, right?
Yeah, I have in the paper. I have a very simple model, as assume one input and one output. But I think that's for multiple output, it doesn't change our system a lot. But for multiple inputs, then you need to change the how a valid transaction is defined. So it means that this transaction has to appear in multiple chains to be validated. But that wouldn't change the conclusion, I think. Yes?
In your paper, you write that there's no mining reward, and that the people that just get a certain amount of points at the beginning.
Yeah.
So how do you handle onboarding of new people, and what is the incentive for people to participate in that network in the first place?
Yeah, that is a good question. Our paper is mainly focused on the reliability of transaction, and so we do not consider the mining. But I think mining and also incentive for people to get on board. Of course, mining is the best way designed for that, and I think that can be easily added to our system. But what we focus on is the value transfer, so we do not include mining in the paper. Well, we assume that, so it's just a main chain. They are motivated to run a main chain with using BFT. So you can, just like, let's assume this is permission blockchain, right? In a permission blockchain, we always assume that the people want to have this blockchain. So they are like more than 2/3 of the honest node will do whatever they are taught to. And we made the same assumption here.
So you have a permission blockchain, and suppose there is a honest subset where only 1/3 is.
So this is the assumption we made for the paper, but I'm just saying this is we don't make additional assumption than the existing permission blockchain. But for permissionless blockchain, we can use the similar structure, but it will need a different model. Okay.
Let's introduce having variable based. You have a near partition where most people are interacting in small groups, but then you have a transaction between those partitions, and suddenly you have to download maybe several tens of gigabytes of data.
Yes. What is the problem that would probably cause?
So if you want to accept a transaction from someone who is like in a completely different part of the network than you, then that might be extremely expensive compared to a normal system where you are constantly receiving all of that.
Yes, but I think that is not really a problem, because that's a price you pay. So now some money is harder to accept. And then you have you can choose to not accept it. But I think that is also the nature of the value transfer system. If you want to receive a foreign currency, then it is harder. So I don't know what would happen if we use this system, but in my opinion, it's just natural. It's not a problem. I think it's something we couldn't say now. Sorry, am I answering your question? Okay.
Another question here.
Do you think it's susceptible to Sybil attacks?
So in ours, let's just say in this paper, we consider permissioned blockchain. And for permissionless blockchain, we need additional, different model and additional schemes. I think it will work, but there's no, I cannot say that.